ये अपना संजीवन है।
Hi friends, welcome to this episode of a series of video lectures. In this episode, we are going to learn some of the more elements related to the story, the last lesson. In this episode, we are going to understand the theme and some of the character sketches and some of the aspects which are related to the very interesting story, that's the last lesson. So initially, let's turn to understand the different themes which are elevated by the author through this story. So one by one, try to understand on which themes the story is best. The story relates to the culture and language. The last lesson, so it deal on the French language and its teacher. So it reveals the culture of the area, Alsace and Lorraine, and as well as it underline the importance of language in the life in the society. And even language is a tool to sustain, to maintain the unity among the people, and it is a type of a tool to gain independence, freedom from the slavery. So language helps to connect people and to live together. So even the culture is also nicely elevated through this story. Then the hegemony of the imperial and colonial power, the dominance of the imperial and colonial power, how they crush the people and how they acquire regions and add the territories to their nations and countries. So this, the dominance of the imperial and colonial power, so that is also brought here very nicely, and it is a mild criticism over this attitude of imperial and colonial powers, that how they try to crush the local language and local people and local culture, and how they use their power to, okay, to disturb the people and to disturb the culture of and the routine of the people. So in this the race of the power, the common people who suffer a lot, education and students suffer a lot, even teachers also they get suffered loss. And in this the competition, or in the struggle, in this sufferings, the humanity, which should be the prime concern to any nation or to any, okay, any power, that remain aside, so that is neglected. The prime motto of the government should they should take care of a common people, or they should safeguard the interest of common people. This remains aside, and only spreading of a power, spreading of a territory, or adding the land to any specific particular country or nation. So these things increase, add lot, or focus. This is a type of a mild criticism on the attitude of the rulers of the imperial and colonial power, that how their dominance, okay, bring fall of the French language in Alsace and Lorraine, and how the student might affected by the decision or by the overpower. One more very important theme is underlined here, the lust for ruling the world, influencing culture and identities. So the powerful countries who give lust for the ruling world, they intend to rule the world and trying to influence the culture and identities, and even try to ruin the culture and the separate identities of the many regions which they overpower. Then the next, that is a pathos of the likely language crisis, and even how the language face the problems. That is also very nicely the theme brought here, very nicely developed through the story. The importance of language is underlined throughout the story. Language, it is an asset, it is a tool, more so in times of a crisis. And whenever a nation or country come in crisis, or when they face any foreign aggression, in such a critical situation, language may emerge as a tool for integrating people, or forming the integration among the people. So the more so in times of a crisis, language can be a very good asset, and it can be an instrumental in forming unity among people in society, in nation. So here the importance of language is very nicely underlined. And then the fear, shame, agony of losing freedom, of learning and using mother tongue. So these themes are also nicely elaborated throughout the story. Dear students, moving forward, now let's understand some of the prime characteristics which are developed by the author in the story. The first and very most important character, the key figure, which is penned down by the author very nicely in this story, that is a Franz. Franz, little Franz, was a student of a school in Alsace. Mr. Hamel was his schoolmaster. Franz was not a brilliant student, so he was not a so wise student, he was not so good student as far as the study is concerned, learning is concerned. Mr. Hamel was his schoolmaster, he was his school teacher. He used to teach many lessons and many subjects. He didn't prepare his lesson on the participle. Franz was told to prepare a lesson on the participles, which he had neglected, which he had not prepared. When he was asked to recite, he got mixed up and confused. And when his turn came, he was asked to recite, so he got mixed up and confused. He was confused a lot. He was always in a dread of a great ruler that Mr. Hamel kept under his arm. So he was always fearful, and he always remained under pressure of the in dread of the great ruler that his teacher, Mr. Hamel, he used to keep under his arm. Franz knew how cranky Mr. Hamel was, and Franz was aware of the nature of his school teacher, Mr. Hamel, and how much he was so cranky. So he was aware of his teacher. Franz knew very well of the nature of his school teacher. However, Franz had to change his opinion about Mr. Hamel. But after that incident, after that last lesson, or in that when the proceeding was on, from that lesson only, Franz had changed his opinion about Mr. Hamel. An order had come from Berlin. So there was an government order, a circular, that German language was imposed on the people of Alsace, and the French language was abolished, and it was told that French language should not be taught to the students in the school, and only German language should be taught. And it was imposed by the winning side. So there was an government circular which had come from Berlin, that the French language and French teacher should be removed, and in place of French, German language should be taught to the students. When he came to know, when he came to know that it was the last lesson of Mr. Hamel, his views about him changed. He began to respect him. He started respecting Mr. Hamel. He understood the role, the contribution, the dedication he had rendered to the students and to the village, to the people society, and to the French language. So he understood the nature and the contribution of Mr. Hamel. So he began to respecting honor him. He had spent 40 years in the same school, so he felt sorry that he had neglected learning French. So he repented and understood he had neglected learning the French language. He shared Mr. Hamel's views about the French. It was the most beautiful language in the world. He listened to Mr. Hamel's last lesson with a rapt attention and a respect. So the last lesson which Mr. Hamel was dealing, he listened with a lot of attention, with a lot of concentration and a respect. So he attended the last lecture. Now let's turn towards the next character, which is also a very key character. So let's understand about Mr. Hamel, the French teacher. He is presented in the mold of a traditional schoolmaster. So Mr. Hamel is portrayed by author in the way of a traditional schoolmaster, how traditional schoolmasters used to be. In the same way, he is presented, that lover of knowledge, education, and respectful personality, and that strict and follower of rules and regulation regime. In this way, the traditional schoolmaster is pinned down through Mr. Hamel. He always kept his terrible ruler under his arm. So with this, dreadful, the fearful, okay, terrible ruler, he used to keep under his arm. Mr. Hamel was a hard tasker master. So he was very hard tasker master. We see the other side of Mr. Hamel's character after the order from Berlin came. And when the order came from Berlin that the teaching of French language should be stopped and German should be imposed in the schools of Alsace. So that changed him. That showed the other side of Mr. Hamel's character. He was a transformed person now. Afterward, after the after the order was received by the Mr. Hamel, then he was seen as a transformed person. He became extra soft and gentle towards his students. On that day, he was seen extra soft and gentle towards students. Otherwise, he was too strict. Otherwise, he was a very strict follower of discipline in the school, and he was a lover of discipline. But on that day, he was seen extra soft and gentle towards his students. He didn't scold Franz for coming late. That day, Franz was late, but he didn't scold Franz. He allowed. So, nor did he use his ruler when Franz got mixed up and confused. And Franz confused and didn't answer. So he was fumbled with the question. Yet, Mr. Hamel didn't use his ruler to punish Franz. He declared that it was his last lesson in French, and he announced that day in the class in front of villagers and students that it was his last lesson in the French. It was his last day, so he might quit. He would go he could leave the school from that day. Mr. Hamel was highly respected both by his students and the village elders. On that day, it was a scene that he was highly respected both by his students and the village elders. He had completed 40 years in the same school. He rendered his services with very honesty, with truthfulness, with the discipline, and with keen interest. He served in the school, village school, continuously for 40 years. So he had developed generations after generations, and he had educated so many students through his tenure. And so his dedication, contribution cannot be neglected. That's why the villagers, they had a lot of respect, and even his students had a lot of honor for him. The village elders came to pay their respect to such a grand teacher. Mr. Hamel loved France and French from the core of his heart. So he was patriotic. He loved his country, France, and French language also from core of his heart. He considered French as the most beautiful language in the world. For Mr. Hamel, his language, his mother tongue, was the most beautiful language in the world. So he considered, and he asked the people to guard it among themselves and never to forget it. Truly, Mr. Hamel was very much patriotic in his he had a lot of love for his country, France, and even his mother tongue, French language. So he appealed to the people and his students and the villagers of that village to guard, to save, and to safeguard the French language, because language is a means of integration of the people, and it can save freedom, and even it help to gain independence from the slavery, and it will help support to unify people and to bring unity among the people. That's why in the last lesson that day, he appealed the people from the core of his heart that people should try their level best uh, to maintain the integrity and separate identity, the freedom of the French language. And French language should not be abolished, it should not be disappeared, there should not be any foreign aggression over the language. So he appealed the people to safeguard and to save language from the foreign aggression and should preserve the French language. Moving forward, dear students, here is a summary of the story, the last lesson by Alfonso Daudet. Uh, you can go through the key points which are mentioned here for your better understanding, and this will help you to understand the story. Here in the summary, the sequence is followed properly, one after another. The happenings or the incidents, those are listed with the help of points. So this is somewhat helpful for your better understanding and quick recap of the story, which will be very helpful in understanding the key incidents and happenings in the poem, as well as there's some of the points which held importance in few of the story. So that will help all the students who will go through this summary or the pages of summary. So here are some of the slides which deal the summary in a very nice way. So I hope this will be very helpful for your studies. Thank you very much for watching this video.